But Dave, I think the time has come. I think the listeners are dying to hear about us putting TARDIS crews in movies. Should we move on to that?
The time has come, the walrus said, to talk of many things.
Yeah, look, we thought, listeners, this would be a nice fluffy one in between doing a big heavy season review last time and what we're going to do next time, which we'll talk about at the end of this show, to do something just fun. And we've put TARDIS teams in different eras of Doctor Who. We've done all sorts of things, but we haven't put them in movies, Dave.
No, and this is a completely stupid, completely improbable, completely implausible. I'm going to be putting TARDIS crews into movies that didn't even exist in this, like they weren't alive for. This is utterly ridiculous, and I'm going to hopefully have immense fun doing it.
Do you know, you say that, I've done something completely different. As a challenge to myself, I picked movies that were concurrent with the TARDIS team at the time.
Interesting. Look, I've got a couple that were, but a couple that definitely are not. So we'll see. Although, now I look at it, there are probably more that are contemporary than not. And that's not deliberate. I suspect it is more about just my brain naturally finding the right crew to go in. Just something that is very 70s and a crew that's very 70s naturally feel like they go together. So maybe subconsciously I've been closer than I thought to you on that. Although some are very much not.
Very good. Well, look, I think you've got one more than me, so maybe you should go first.
Thank you very much. And look, I will. My first one is a little bit contemporaneous with each other, and it is, naturally for me, of course, very, very 90s, because I have decided to put the Seventh Doctor, Ace, and Bernice Summerfield, of course, from the New Adventures, I've decided to put them into Starship Troopers.
Oh, wow.
Now, the way I see this panning out is that firstly, Ace ends up aboard the starships, and she's part of that pilot crew that goes through there. And maybe in my mind I'm thinking about the proposed Earth Aid story that Ben Aronovich was pitching to open season 27, where it would open on Ace in command of a starship. I've got that vibe in my mind. So she's up there doing the starship thing with all those people. And some very strong...
She's up there with Ibanez.
Yes, that's right. Some very strong female characters up there. Benny ends up down on the planet with the troopers, which I think would be very, very funny and also very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And then the Seventh Doctor ends up working with Neil Patrick Harris, doing those experiments, but he's not doing the torturous experiments on the bugs. He leans Neil Patrick Harris's character into doing more about the telepathy and the psychic powers that they're exploring. And in the end, the Seventh Doctor is trying to get the character to communicate with the bugs so that they can actually reach a peace with the bugs and understand the bugs. And that changes the whole end of the movie.
Interesting. I like that a lot.
So that is my 90s pick.
Okay. I would like to put Peter Capaldi and Clara in a 2017 film, and that film is Dunkirk.
Oh.
So I thought I'll start off with an historical here, and I don't actually have particularly strong reasons for this particular mashup, outside of the fact I would have liked to have seen Capaldi do more historical stuff in general. We get Thin Ice, we get Eaters of Light, maybe Robot of Sherwood at a pinch, but I can't think of many more than that. When I sat down and was jotting them down, I couldn't think of many more like really, really historical type things. And I just think there's something really strong with Capaldi in France with this doomed British army, and let's say the TARDIS lands somewhere within British lines, but the German advance has overtaken it, so the TARDIS is behind German lines. He has to get himself and Clara off Dunkirk, but of course they get split up. Of course they do. It's what happens in Doctor Who. And it just goes from there. They have to escape Dunkirk. They're in an historical situation and they don't have the TARDIS.
Can we get Peter Capaldi paired up for a scene with Harry Styles?
I'm sure we can.
That would be interesting to watch. That's a really interesting take, and I can certainly imagine that in my mind. And the scene that I want to see there, and maybe it's just me, is a moment when Clara turns to the Doctor and says, "Doctor, all this conflict, give them the speech, the one you gave to the Zygons about peace is always right and they should just not fight." And the Doctor turning and saying, "Sometimes there are things worth fighting for."
Oh, gosh, that'd be good.
That would be really good. I'd like that.
Excellent. What's your next one?
I'm going way back now, away from the 90s. I'm going to the 60s, in fact. And I am putting the first Doctor, Vicky, Ian and Barbara, into the epic movie Cleopatra.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this is just a natural one. I think that if the 60s had the budget, it is what they absolutely would have done. And again, I've paired up the crew with different elements of the plot. So Barbara, naturally, is going to end up with Cleopatra, trying to convince her to make different decisions. Barbara knows that you can't change the whole of history, but she knows you can save one life, and maybe she can save Cleopatra's life. And so she's taking the lessons from the Aztecs and trying to apply it, but again, probably without success. Ian ends up falling in with Anthony's army. He's there at the Battle of Actium, he's there at the Battle of Alexander, and he's fighting with this army, trying to get back to Barbara, who's there with Cleopatra. And of course, Vicky and the Doctor are in Rome. They end up travelling with Octavian and just observing this, and the Doctor falling in and out of conspiracy, trying not to give away hints to Octavian, and then they all meet as Cleopatra falls.
Would Octavian be onto him? Because Octavian's a smart dude.
I like the idea of Octavian realising that this guy knows more than he's saying, and just working out if he can play him and manipulate him. And that battle, that will between them, I think would be very, very interesting.
Oh, I like that one a lot. Moving on, I've got Smithy and Amy in a 2010 film, and that film is Alice in Wonderland.
The weird one, the scary one.
Yes. I couldn't go past this. I think of all the Doctors I could put in a weird CGI Alice in Wonderland kind of setting, it's got to be Smith.
Yes.
You know, you think of him just wandering around, meeting weird people, you know, his arms and legs all over the place like a baby horse, you know, the way he walks around. He's like a CGI character himself. And I think the dark fantasy that Tim Burton does in general would just fit this so well. And the more I thought about it, the more I got a Land of Fiction kind of vibe, which might be the way in. You literally have the Doctor and Amy helping Alice to escape or something like that. It was really just the setting that drew me in on this one. The story is so well formed, you know, the story is the story. But this dark fantasy, I just couldn't see any other Doctor in Alice in Wonderland but Smithy.
I'm now imagining the 11th Doctor dressed as a carpenter, strolling along a beach with a walrus. And it just seems so right.
There you go.
There you go. And look, you're right. Matt Smith being directed by Tim Burton makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it really does.
Oh, that's fun. One here where the pictures are definitely not contemporaneous with each other. Mm-hmm. I've got the 10th Doctor and Donna. They arrive on an island in the middle of the Atlantic, the Pacific. It's not quite clear. They wander around. At first it seems deserted. Then they hear noise. It sounds like children. And then they wander over a sand dune and they see a bunch of young British boys. No adults around. Obviously washed up somehow.
Yeah.
About to fight each other because they've arrived in the middle of Lord of the Flies.
Oh, yes.
And there's something about the 10th Doctor and all his sort of smugness and Englishness around the whole, we're not savages, we're British, and the British are best at everything. And just sort of in that, and then, you know, Donna coming in with a few appropriate put-downs and telling them to pull their heads in and, you know, not to pick on Piggy and all of that sort of thing. And, you know, maybe it's not quite going right. Maybe there's some sort of malevolent alien force that's feeding on all the tension or something. And maybe that's why the kids in Lord of the Flies go quite so evil quite so quickly. That could be the twist there. But mostly I just want to see Donna slapping around some of those kids.
I was about to say, the image in my head was Tennant maybe not controlling the kids, but Donna pulling one along by his ear.
Yes.
Like, right, mister.
It's exactly it. You've got me exactly.
Yeah, I can picture that. That's excellent. All right, moving along. I've got Colin and Mel in a 1986 movie, Labyrinth.
Oh, goodness.
Now, this is very similar to the Alice in Wonderland example in some ways, and yet it's very different in other ways. I almost didn't pick it, but it's different enough, I think. Labyrinth is this classic 80s film. David Bowie's in it, and there's heaps of puppetry, which made me think of Bandrels. And who better to step into this weird but practical effects world? It's not a CGI world like Alice in Wonderland. This is a weird practical effects world. Who better than Colin and Mel? So while, yes, it's another fantasy realm, I think this would feel so different to Alice in Wonderland because it's more grounded And there's singing. You know, Colin could have a sing with Bowie. Mel could have a good scream at all the creatures. It's super 80s. I just thought, as it fell into my head, I thought, yes, I can't not put Colin and Mel in Labyrinth.
It's very Doctor Who stage play that Colin did. What was that, Seven Keys to Doomsday? Or was it the other one?
It's the other one.
It's the other one.
Ultimate Adventure.
Ultimate Adventure, thank you. We got there in the end. Yes, it does have that sort of vibe, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah.
And Bonnie, like that, just makes perfect sense. You know, Bonnie doing a duet with a Muppet. What more do you want?
It all fits.
It all fits. That's very cool. My fourth pick. In this one, we have the Fourth Doctor, Romana and Adric. Mm-hmm. They arrive on Earth sometime in the 23rd century, maybe. It's not quite clear. And they think that everything's going fine. And then suddenly, everything starts to shake. The water starts to boil and flash around and everything's going on. And Earth's under attack from some sort of strange probe. The Doctor meets up with a bunch of people who say, we need to get some whales. We need to get them from the 20th century. He says,
oh, no.
I've got a time machine. I've got a time machine. I can take you back and help you get your whales. Yep. Because, of course, I've put the Fourth Doctor into Star Trek for the voyage home. And I think that is perfect because who would you want to try and help you get some whales from 200 years ago but the Doctor? And so they all end up back in 1980s San Francisco. Adric ends up working with Scotty on the whale tank and doing those calculations to make the transparent aluminium and getting all that going. I think that would work really well. Romana ends up with Chekhov on the USS Enterprise, the nuclear vessel, trying to get all the nuclear energy, and maybe things go a bit better with her running the show than Chekhov. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I think really made this pick work for me is that the Fourth Doctor ends up spending some time with Kirk and Dr. Taylor. Now, Kirk is still flirting with Dr. Taylor and trying to get in her pants, but Dr. Taylor's kind of more interested in this mysterious alien guy, and he's sort of very, oh, you're a beautiful woman, probably. And she can't quite understand why he's not falling for her, and Kirk can't understand why she's not falling for him, and you get this sort of wonderful triangle, which I think would be quite fun. And just the energy of the Tom Baker Doctor and William Shatner's Kirk in a love triangle to me just is wonderful. But the Fourth Doctor in the one with the whales, what more do you need?
I would not have thought of this in a million years, but I love it.
Oh, thank you very much.
Here's one that you might not have thought of, because it's certainly my out-of-the-box one. I've taken Sylvester and Ace, and I've put them in a 1988 movie. That movie is The Last Temptation of Christ.
No, I would never have thought of that.
You know how there's one of the McCoy writers on one of the DVDs in one of the documentaries, and he's like, I was asked who the Doctor is, and I said, well, he's God.
Yes.
You know, and combined with Cartmel pushing the envelope, this has got to be the logical conclusion to that. You get McCoy and Sophie in a quarry pretending to be the desert, and you do The Last Temptation of Christ. You know, you have the Doctor interacting with this guy, and you don't fall on either side of the fence. You don't say, oh, he's just some deluded soul leading this Jewish cult. You don't say he's the son of God. You just have these deep philosophical musings from McCoy with Christ. You have some Romans perhaps doing some Roman things. You maybe have that sort of predestination vibe where Jesus knows what he has to do. You know, I know this is a bit crazy, but I thought this feels kind of right for the era. It's, oh, Dave, what do you reckon? The Last Temptation of Christ.
Look, I love how balmy that is. That's an incredible pick. The two big drawbacks I see are firstly, I'm just imagining that being pitched to JNT and him saying something like, oh, look, okay, do it, but just don't call him Jesus. And the other thing that gets me is just this idea that, 30 AD Judea would be filmed in a quarry.
Yes.
So it would probably be a magnificent disaster, but I kind of want to see it.
Yeah, so that's where I ended up with Sylvester and Ace.
That's very cool and very weird. Oh my goodness. And look, knowing Cartmel probably turned out that Jesus was a Time Lord or something, so...
Yes!
I've gone for a slightly more sedate one for my next pick.
Okay.
I'm taking the 12th Doctor and Bill, and I'm putting them into Dead Poets Society.
Oh, school setting comes immediately to mind.
School setting, academic. But a bit more than that. Firstly, I just want to see Peter Capaldi and Robin Williams performing together. I think that would be an amazing dynamic that I just would love to see. And I think I'd love to see Robin Williams with Capaldi more than any other Doctor, just because of the tone and the vibe and the energy that they have. How would these pampered American schoolboys, white bread, elite American, deal with Bill?
Ooh, in that era, yes.
In that era, that could be a very interesting dynamic that I'd want to see.
It's not quite family of blood kind of.
No, it's different, and because the American experience is different to the British experience, but it would be playing off that, and Bill's a different character to Martha as well, and I think it would be a very different reaction. I like the idea of Capaldi being able to say things to the headmaster that Robin Williams can't say. Robert Williams has to pull his punches because he's a professional, he's an employee, he's a nice guy. And as he's pulling his punches, the 12th Doctor looking at him with this bizarre, why are you doing this look, and turn around to the headmaster, you're an idiot.
Yes.
I think that would be a wonderful moment. And look, in the very end, could you imagine the 12th Doctor standing on a desk saying, "Oh, Captain, my Captain"?
Oh.
And leading that charge for freedom of creativity, freedom of intellectual, for the freedom to learn, the freedom of the individual, like just all the things that movie is about.
And all the things the Doctor stands for.
And all the things the Doctor stands for just being summed up by the Doctor on a desk, "Oh, Captain, my Captain."
Wow. No, I got chills up my spine then. That's good.
Thank you. As I say, it's one of my more serious ones, but I do love the imagery of that one.
Yeah. I'm going with a more... it is more serious. Of course it is, when you hear it. I'm taking Tennant and Rose, putting them in a 2006 film called Pan's Labyrinth.
I know it, but I haven't seen it.
Okay. Well, this is where we can put Tennant and Piper back in time into an historical era. It's just post the Spanish Civil War. Franco is in charge. World War II is still going on. I think it's about 43 or 44 or something like that. But there's also some dark fantasy going on. And here I go again with the dark fantasy. But I think fantasy elements work really well in Doctor Who. There's always been a sci-fantasy, to my mind, going on in Doctor Who, aside from some very brief eras where it was more super-duper science fiction, like the Bidmead era, or what Jerry Davis was doing in the 60s and things like that. And I think this could actually have been a stepping-off point for Rose, because if anyone knows the film, and it's got these themes of the underworld and self-sacrifice and all of that, Rose could step in for that young girl role and then have to make the sacrifice that she makes. I'm trying to be non-spoilery about the plot of Pan's Labyrinth.
Yep.
And she would make that sacrifice and then still be alive, but be in a different world. Kind of how she ends up in the actual show in Doomsday, but via what happens in Pan's Labyrinth. I just think it would work marvellously. And I think if anyone out there knows Pan's Labyrinth, put Rose into that girl's position. It could be really, really interesting. Yeah,
as I say, I don't know the movie, but I know of it, and I certainly know of the era, and Rose's reaction to all that, yes, I think would be very, very interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to hear what listeners think of that one out of probably all the ones I've done here, actually.
Interesting. So my second last, I have gone with the Third Doctor.
Okay.
He's between seasons 7 and 8, so he's just accompanied by the Brigadier. And, of course, his TARDIS isn't working. Now, at this point, they realise that there's a report that maybe the Master's up to something in Iran. And so they get on a plane and they go to Tehran. But, of course, this is the era, and I'm using original unit dating here, so it's about 1979. And suddenly the Brigadier and the Doctor get caught up in the Iranian Revolution. And suddenly they're hiding in the Canadian Embassy. And suddenly they've got to get back to London with all these people because I'm putting the Third Doctor into Argo.
I was going to say, and then Ben Affleck appears.
So I just sort of love the idea of the Brigadier particularly, but also the Third Doctor, having to skulk around revolutionary Iran. I think at some point the Doctor's got to knock out a revolutionary guard with some Venusian Aikido, and they've got to get on with diplomats, and just adding the extra layer of a British Army officer trying to get out with this group in the Brigadier, I think would be very interesting. And it does explore that thing about the Pertwee era of the Doctor is without his TARDIS, And in this case, he's not even going to be in the home counties in London. He's in Iran. What do they do? What does the Brigadier do in Iran? He can't just call up Trap 3 and get Mike Yates to come along. So, that's what I did.
That chap he knocks out, is that before or after the brig just tries to shoot him?
I'm not quite sure, but I'm thinking as well about that scene at the airport where they've got to convince the Revolutionary Guard that they're making a science fiction movie, and just the Doctor saying, well, of course, it's about Venusians and they've got 6 feet and they do, Perigosto sticks, and and the guy just going, oh, for God's sake, go catch your plane.
Yes. Oh, that'd be fabulous. I love it.
Your final one, Rob.
Yeah, this is my final one. I've got Davo, I've got Tegan, and I've got Turlough in a 1984 film, Dave. And there were a lot of good films in 1984.
There were.
I'm putting them in Gremlins.
Oh, goodness.
I saved my super fun one for last. This is super 80s. I just see something fun in Gremlins taking over a town, or even getting into the TARDIS itself. Maybe after Turlough spilled some water on a mogwai and created the Gremlins. And it just opens up this chance for the Doctor to science things up and put on his half-moon specs, maybe get a bit of a Quatermass vibe going on, and playing the whole thing straight, even though all these little puppets are running around causing absolute mayhem. Tegan could probably punch some and say bugger off, and I think the whole thing would work marvellously. I really do.
And Turlough ends up trapped in a cellar somewhere with one.
Yes. Yes, frothing at the mouth.
Yeah. Oh, that is fun. Yes, that is fun. That's a good movie and a good TARDIS team.
There you go.
My final one, I've also saved a fun one for the end. I have decided that the Ninth Doctor and Rose are going to turn up on the NSEA Protector as members of the crew of Galaxy Quest.
Oh, wow.
I just think that would be so much fun. Christopher Eccleston and Alan Rickman playing off each other would be such a delight. Rose down on the away mission with Tim Allen, who's, finding excuses to take his shirt off all the time, would be really, really fun. And then it ends with the great big space battle. It ends with a big confrontation, which is a thing that the Ninth Doctor does really well. But after that, the NSEA Protector crashes at a great big science fiction convention, and we get the wonderful delight of Christopher Eccleston having to walk through a sci-fi convention.
Brilliant. Brilliant. I love it.
That one is just a fun thing that I want to see.
Oh, wow. Now, Dave, we didn't solicit our listeners to give their own thoughts, but when our listeners remembered we were doing this episode, some of them just tweeted us some thoughts of their own. So I've got a few here to read out if you want to hear them.
Yeah, please.
Oscar Groucho, at Oscar Grouchos on Twitter, said Paul McGann and Daphne Ashbrook in Matthew McConaughey's Sahara.
Paul McGann and Matthew McConaughey. I want to see that.
That'd be pretty good.
Yeah.
Quite an adventure, yeah. Kevin Hush, who was at Khan 44411, says Tom and Elizabeth in When Harry Met Sally. Davo and Sarah, by which I think he must mean Sarah Sutton, in Fiddler on the Roof.
Well, that would definitely make Fiddler on the Roof much better than it was without them.
It's very true. Maybe that's Kevin's point.
But most things would.
Yes. Sylv and Sophie in The Avengers, not the superhero movie, but The Avengers, the 60s British show.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Sophie and Mrs. Peel, they have some things in common, but some things so not.
Yeah, it would be different.
Yeah.
And Ten and the crew of Journey's End in The Avengers, the superhero movie.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, good one, Kevin.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Jethro Roos, at Jethro_Roos, says, I can see Capaldi doing some highbrow political comedy with lots and lots of swearing.
Yes, I think that would be very fun.
Yeah, if it's not already been done. And the Diddly Dumb podcast, at Diddly_Dumb, says, how about transposing the cast of The Romans to Carry On Cleo?
Well, it would be exactly the same movie, wouldn't it? Which I think is their point.
There you go.
Oh, yes. Look, lots of fun ideas you could come up with there. And look, it wasn't that hard to come up with the 7 I did. I could have come up with more. But good to have some fun with the concept.
Yeah, look, once I started settling on the teams I wanted to talk about and then looked at what movies were made in the years that they were the incumbents, I was coming across, there's half a dozen here I could really talk about, so I really had to cull things down.
You see, I went the other way. I thought, what's a movie that I could see working with a Doctor Who crew?
Right.
And then said, what crew should it be?
Interesting. Okay, and I went the exact opposite.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah.